And we are live. Thank you for joining us during the 8th episode of the Windows Management User Group Tuesdays webinar. Today we have Tim De Keukelaere from Belgium about the latest and greatest in the world of Config Manager. Thanks, Tim, for joining us. Before Tim kicks off, we would like to thank our sponsors, because without any sponsors, we're not able to arrange events like this, normally on premises, and hopefully we will be back on prem later this year. But for now, we have a virtual event, and again, thanks for our sponsors. Always reach out to us via social media, Facebook, Twitter. Today, if you have questions, use the Q&A or use hashtag WMUG_NL. We will be watching the Q&A and Twitter, so we can inform Tim if there are any questions. Also, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel because we want to get rid of that long URL, and we want to have a decent channel name. So subscribe to the YouTube channel and we can make it work. Next week, our last WMUG Tuesdays before the summer, before we will have a break of a couple of weeks. Dirk van der Woude will join us and talk with us about Azure Sentinel and the brute force RDP attacks, which are happening a lot these days. But now I want to introduce Tim De Keukelaere. Tim, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. I hope everybody can hear me. Let me share my screen. Hang on, sharing this one. If all goes well, you should see the presentation now.
Yep.
Okay, so welcome everybody, and thanks of course to the WMUG NL for having me as a guest for the session of today. Today's session is about the latest and greatest in the world of Configuration Manager, and I've started doing these latest and greatest sessions a few months back, even when I noticed that, okay, because of the pace of the new releases of Configuration Manager, whether it's in the current branch or in the technical preview, it's very difficult to keep up with all the new stuff that is being released. And I see a lot of my customers not using all those new features, whether big or small, while it is available to them in their environment. So the purpose of this session is to bring you all up to speed and hopefully introduce a couple of new things that you haven't noticed yet in your environment. So quick introduction about myself. So my name is Tim De Keukelaere. I am based in Belgium. I work as a freelance consultant. For the past almost 2 decades, my focus has been on managing workplaces and mobile devices, which has been rebaptized as endpoint management not that long ago. So that's my area of focus, and that's what I do on a day-to-day basis at my customers as well. I'm pretty strong and active in the community. So I'm one of the founding board members of the MC2MC Belgian community. It's very similar to the WMUG.nl, where we organize events and try to share knowledge about different technologies. And for the past 6 consecutive years, I've been awarded by Microsoft as an MVP in the enterprise mobility class. So yeah, I'm of course on social media. So even after this session, if you have any questions or you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out through one of the channels that you see on this slide. Okay, so without further ado, what do we have on the agenda for the upcoming hour? Just a quick recap. I think most of you will be familiar with the different branches of Configuration Manager. Let's look a little bit into what versions are available to us right now, and then we deep dive into those features of the product. So first of all, let's have a look at the branches. Well, there are 3 main branches of Configuration Manager. The technical preview branch, which is being released on a monthly basis, is where we get a heads up experience of what features will be released in the current branch. Technical preview, of course, is not suitable for production usage. It's very limited in what you can do from an infrastructure perspective. You can only have a single primary site. You can have about 10 devices in that environment. So definitely not for production use. I mentioned this comes out on a monthly basis. Sometimes we also have 2 releases per month, depending on the cadence that the team and Redmond wants to follow. Yeah. The focus of this session is on the second element that you see there, the current branch releases. This is what we typically use and implement at customers. Anything in there is production ready, except for a couple of features which are marked as pre-release. And I'll come to that as we further progress through this session. And the third one, I had to put it on there for completeness. That's the long-term servicing branch. That's something that I think, in my opinion, is very rare and for specific scenarios only, and is something that you should not consider in 99.9% of the cases. Yeah. So our focus for this session is on the current branch, and where are we from a releases perspective? There have been quite some current branch releases, and what you see on this slide are those releases which are currently still under support. So as you can see, if you are at this point running 1810 or 1902, it's about time to start thinking about upgrading your environment, because support will end by the end of this year. Yeah. Focus for this session is about the latest and greatest. So focus is on the 2002 release, which is the latest release that came out in April of this year. Yeah. Sometimes it's a little bit confusing when people say, okay, it's the 2002 release. Shouldn't that be like the second month in February and not an availability date of April? Well, apparently the numbering is the date when the early update ring is released. So sometimes we have TAP, sometimes we have early update ring that comes before the general availability of the product. So there is the difference originating from. Yeah. Another important aspect there is what you see in the 2 last columns about baselines and in-console updates. If you are doing a greenfield implementation, so setting up a new configuration manager hierarchy, you need a baseline edition, so media that you can download from the volume licensing site from Microsoft. So in this case, we are lucky. 2002 was also a baseline edition. We can start from this point on. Yeah. Had it not been a baseline, we would first have to install 1902, which was the previous baseline, and then upgrade up to the latest version. Yeah. The in-console updates, of course, we can just run them from the console and upgrade in place. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on and have a look at the new features. And I'm starting off with one of the most significant ones, and that's a feature which is called Tenant Detach. And yeah, first thing to do here is to take away some confusion, which I've seen in the past couple of days and weeks. Tenant Detach is something different than co-management. Tenant Detach doesn't require co-management. They're not linked. They're not related to each other. So what does it do? It's an enabler for managing devices from MEMAC, the Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center, which is a console in the cloud, if you want to call it like that. And here you can see a screenshot of that Endpoint Manager Admin Center. Yeah. And where can you identify where a product is or a device is originating from? It's in the managed by column. So the second column that you see there, which I've highlighted on the screenshot, that's where you can see, okay, this is coming up from my on-premise configuration manager site, and it's synchronized into that console into the cloud. So what can we do once a device has been sent into the cloud or uploaded into the MEMAC console? We can do a couple of actions, and at this point, it's only a few, but I foresee that this will evolve in the future, and more things and more capabilities will show up. At this point, we can do 3 things from the console. We can do a sync of the machine policy, the user policy, or trigger an application evaluation cycle. And the following screenshot, it's a drill down of one of the clients which was listed. And on top, you can see the 3 actions which we can trigger. And at the bottom of the pane, you see an action status. And in this specific example, the machine policy was just triggered, and the status is that it's pending a connection. Yeah, and I can show this in a demo just in a few seconds. So let's have a look. So what are the requirements to do a tenant attach? Well, first things first, we have, of course, the need for a tenant. We need the permissions in the tenant, which is a global admin account, because when we onboard through the tenant attached feature, we have a third-party app that needs to be created, and yeah, we need the permissions, of course, in Azure AD as well. Yeah. When you're operating the MEMAC console, so the cloud-based console, you also require specific permissions or specific user accounts. Bottom line, the user account used to administer has to be synced in Azure Active Directory. That's the most important one. And then, of course, you need the specific permission, initiate configuration manager action, to do the actual triggering of the tasks. So I've mentioned the confusion, and I can understand where it comes from, because if you want to implement the tenant attach capability, there are two implementation paths. In an environment where co-management has already been enabled in the past, it's pretty easy to turn this feature on. You have to go to the properties of co-management, and you can see there is a specific tab which is called Configure Upload. If you enable the checkbox Upload to Microsoft Endpoint Manager Admin Center, that's all you need to enable tenant attach. Yeah? That's in the scenario where you are already on co-management. If you don't have co-management yet, there is a way to implement tenant attach, and it has to be done through the co-management setup wizard. So that's potentially where the confusion originates from. Yeah. So how do you do that? Well, you run the co-management setup wizard, but in the first step, the tenant onboarding step, there are two checkboxes. Yeah. And the second checkbox, enable automatic client enrollment for co-management, that's the one that you should disable if you only want to do tenant attach. Yeah, and then you just run to the rest of the steps of the wizard, and you are enabling the tenant attach feature. Of course, Config Manager is known for its wide variety of log files, and with every new feature, there are new log files. So for completeness in the slide deck, I have added the two most relevant log files for the tenant attach feature. And what you see, the screenshot that I've taken here, is when I did the setup in one of my lab environments, I opened up the sync upload worker, and there you can see the first time my devices, so I had 6 devices on premise in my lab environment, you can see the 6 records being sent up into the cloud, into the MEMAC console. Yeah? That's what you should see during the initial setup of the tenant attach feature. Yeah. So if all goes well, and the demo gods are with me today, I can do a short demo of tenant attach. Let's see if I can switch. So I'm sharing my desktop, so if all goes well, you should be able to see all this. Yeah. So 2 things you can see here. This is my MEMAC console. So it's bottom line, the Edge browser. I've went to endpoint.microsoft.com. That's the easiest way, in my opinion, to open up the admin center. And this is the landing page. Yeah. So where do I want to go to? If I want to look at the tenant attached devices, I go to Devices. I go to Windows. And here you can see, you also saw it on the screenshot earlier, my devices that I can manage. These client 1, 2, 3, and 4 are clients originating from the on-premise environment. Yeah. So if I drill down, you can see a couple of details. You can click and see a little bit more even. And here on top, you have the 3 actions that we can take. Yeah. You can also see that yesterday when I was preparing for this session, I did a sync machine policy, and in the action status, you can see that it successfully was completed. Yeah? So maybe let's do this one more time so you can see how it works in the field. So I'm switching to my lab environment. That specific client. So this is client 1. Logging on, if I remember my password correctly. There we go. So if I open up on this client, the policy agent, and I will do this option to ignore existing lines, so it will be blank. If I trigger something, and this is a demo to show you how fast it goes. So if I go now back to the cloud and to the admin console there, this will travel down into my lab environment, which is just a small box hiding in the back of my garage, and will trigger this almost straight away. So going back to the console, triggering the machine policy, for example, you can see here that the action is initiated. So if I now go back to my client, straight away I notice, yeah, the time zone for my lab is in a different time zone, but you notice that straight away the action is triggered on the client itself. This is a local log file on the client. So this is coming from Azure onto my on-premise infrastructure configuration manager down to the client level and triggering this action in a matter of seconds. So it is really, really, really fast. There is no latency, no delay. Yeah. So if I go back now to the console, you can see if I, for example, switch, you can see that right now, local time 4:16, the sync has already completed. That's what we saw on the client as well. Yeah. So quick demo, as I mentioned, there are only a few tasks that we can do now, but I foresee that this will expand and evolve in the very near future. Yeah. So let's pick up again with the presentation. So what you will see now is a set of smaller new things that were introduced into the product, but therefore they're not less significant. They can also be very nice. This is a design thingy, the CAS Removal Support. Ever since I've been working with Config Manager, I've tried to do my very, very best to steer my customers away from implementing a CAS, a central administration server at the top of your configuration manager hierarchy. A few of them decided not to go down that path and did the implementation anyway. And now, a few years further down the road, they see the downside of that design decision that they've taken. Yeah, so they want to get rid of the CAS, and it hasn't always been that easy. Over the past few releases, Microsoft has taken a couple of steps to facilitate that. But now they've come to a point where you can completely remove it. Yeah. So as it states here, you need a hierarchy with just a CAS and a single child primary site. So if you have a very complex hierarchy already with multiple child primaries, you first have to slim it down to only one child primary site. And at that point, what you can do is, call your Microsoft Premier support contact, so typically your TAM or service delivery manager. They can open up an advisory case for you, and through that advisory case, they can enable the feature to do the CAS removal support. So you can take away the CAS out of your infrastructure. Now, of course, for me, the most important thing is the sentence at the bottom. Slimming down your hierarchy is not something that's done in 2 seconds, in my opinion. You have to really think this through, go over the blueprint of your design again, and see and envision it for the future. Think about scaling and sizing, but also think about unique roles. If you have a CAS, then there might be, for example, an asset intelligence synchronization point, something with endpoint protection, your reporting services point. There's a very high probability that they exist on your CAS. If you remove the CAS, you may want to move those roles somewhere else so you don't lose those capabilities in your environment. Yeah, so something to think about. Okay, what else do we have in 2002? Management insight rules. So management insight rules, as the title already states, they should help you as a config manager admin to get better insights in your environment and give you some advice of potential actions that you can take to optimize. Yeah. In the 2002 release, there are two groups of management insight rules which are added. And the first one is about configuration manager assessment, and it includes 9 new rules. This is what Microsoft calls a gift from the Premier Field Engineering Group, and it's based on checks and activities that they typically perform during their missions at customers. As you can see, the first 3 bullets, for example, are about Active Directory discovery methods. If you run them too frequently, that's not really healthy for your environment. So you will get a proactive alert stating that, hey, you may want to revisit this and yeah, configure it in a more appropriate way. Yeah. Limiting collections to the all systems or all users collection, that's not a smart thing to do either. So yeah, it will also warn you if you have that situation in your environment. Disabling heartbeat discovery may result in clients being removed from your config manager database that are still alive and kicking. So you shouldn't disable it. So this will give you a notification if you don't enable it properly. Yeah. Collection queries, so complex collection queries which have a performance impact or require quite some resources, plus having incremental updates enabled, well, that's a sum of fears. So yeah, it will give you a warning if this is the case in your environment, and so on and so on. Issues with secondary site installations, for example, it will also give you a warning. If you have a hierarchy with multiple sites and you're running different versions, which is not the best practice at all, well, it will say, okay, you have to level up, all your sites to the same version. So at a glance, you can see any issues that arise in these categories. Yeah. And of course, as config manager is more cloud attached than ever, there are also management insight rules that will tell you, okay, you're missing some essential elements to properly connect to the cloud. For example, the HTTPS configuration or devices not properly uploading in Azure AD. Well, you will get those notifications also in the insight rules. Yeah. Maybe I can quickly show that as well. So where are those insight rules? I will show you in my lab environment. Go to the console. I hope this is all visible. So if you go to the administration workspace, at the bottom, you will get the management insights node. If you go to all insights, it will give you a list. And for example, the configuration manager assessment group, that's the one I was talking about with the Premier Field Engineering tips and tricks. Yeah. So if you double click, it will open that, and my lab environment is doing pretty much okay. You can see at the pie chart here, okay, it gives you an indication. And I only have one thing that is not properly or configured in a most optimized way. And this is something that is always happening in a lab environment. I have a couple of collections which are limited to the all systems collection. And it gives you a warning or an indication that you need to take an action there. Now, of course, what action to take on which collections? If I double click that, I will get a proper overview of what collections are limited to the all systems or the all user collection. So I can start cleaning this up and then rerun revisit the insights later on. And hopefully it looks better then, and I get a 100% green pie chart. Yeah. So that's just in 2 seconds the management insight. Something I see people often very rarely use, and well, I think it's pretty handy to let's say optimize your environment. Yeah. Okay, back to the presentation. What else do we have? A couple of smaller things which I'll, for the sake of time, skip through very fast, but I leave them in the presentation for completeness. The REST API for the SMS provider, so for automation purposes, some improvements there. So it's using the site self-cert certificate now. So even if the enhanced HTTP is not configured, and you don't have the hassle of manually binding PKI certificates on web servers and things like that. So small improvement in the world of automation. Proxy support for Azure AD discovery and group sync. Most surprisingly, in previous releases, there was an issue if you're using proxies. It didn't really respect the site system property or the site system setting. Now it is respecting that setting, and you can use it for Azure AD user discovery, group discovery, and syncing collection memberships. CMG tokens, again, more focus on taking away the complexity of certificate management. We can also do now token-based authentication for CMG. So there are two methods of getting that token on the client. You can register if your system is often connected on the internal network. You can get the unique token. If it's not, you can use a client installation property to get the token installed that way. Yeah, that's another way to do it, and I think very handy for smaller sets of clients in specific customer environments. All right, what else? Desktop analytics. Desktop analytics is something that I see commonly used at customers, and of course another cloud service. So we want to make sure that our clients are able to connect to the desktop analytics service in the cloud, and therefore we now have the dashboard in Configuration Manager. So if you go to the software library workspace and you go to the desktop analytics overview, there you can see a dashboard like this. And what they have included now in that dashboard are specific checks about endpoint connectivity. If a client, for example, can't reach the desktop analytics service, you will see this in the dashboard. Yeah. If there are, for example, proxy issues or proxy authentication issues, you can see it in the dashboard. And the nice thing is that you can double click or drill down on the dashboard and you get a flat list of the devices that are having issues, and you can further troubleshoot very specifically. Yeah. So that's something new as well. CMPivot improvements. So for those of you familiar with CMPivot, it was not always easy, or it took some time to find specific entities in CMPivot. Now they have included a search feature, and they've also visualized, they've included specific icons to differentiate objects. So as you can see here in this screenshot, I've marked it, there's a search box. If you type start, every entity with the word start in there is being properly listed. This goes really fast and helps you working in a more efficient way with the CMPivot tool. Excluding certain subnets for peer content download. So as you can see in the screenshot from my lab environment, you can see the checkbox allow peer downloads in this boundary group. There are specific scenarios where you don't want clients sharing content with each other. Think about VPN solutions, for example, where all your clients end up. If you can isolate your VPN in a boundary group, you can disable the peer content sharing features there, and avoid your clients downloading or sharing content amongst each other. You can also now say or limit that during the peer downloads that a client can only use peers in the same subnet. You can have that wasn't the case in the past. You can now limit it down to only sharing amongst clients in one subnet. That's another option in 2002. Microsoft Connected Cache, or DOINC. So delivery optimization, getting content from the cloud cached in your on-premise environment on your distribution points. There used to be a limitation there that you couldn't use proxy servers for internet access or unauthenticated proxy server access. Now that is supported. So in 2002, they support that as well. Another nice feature in client log collection, and I know I'm going through this very fast for the sake of time. Client log collection, well, when troubleshooting clients, the first thing we always do is dig into the log files. In some scenarios, as I can see, customers are implementing more and more secure environments. It's not always easy to connect to the client anymore and get to the client log files. And now we can do that through the Configuration Manager console. So how do we do that? You may have noticed if you, in a previous release, right-clicked a device in the console, you had a section which was called Client Diagnostics. And in the past, you can trigger verbose logging, switch it on and off. But now in 2002, you will see a third option there, which is called collecting the client logs. And if you do that, what is done through the fast channel, a notification message is sent to the client, and then the client will send the log files up to the backend, to the site server. So how does that work? Well, those logs are sent through the management point, and it's using the same channel or the same capability as software inventory would use. That doesn't mean that you have to have software inventory enabled. Even if that feature is disabled in the client settings, this functionality still works. So what happens is then the files get uploaded, and how do you access them? Well, through the Resource Explorer. So if you would right-click, and maybe I can demo that in a second. If they are uploaded and you open up the Resource Explorer, you can then go to the collected files, and if you then double-click them, they will open up in another config manager tool, which is called Support Center. And as I mentioned earlier, every new feature comes with new log files, and these are the log files across the different players in this scenario. So from the client to the site server, there are logs that you can follow and see how the uploading goes. There is one limitation to take into account. What it does before sending the log files, it's compressing them in a zip file, and there is a size limit. If the log files in total exceed 100 megabytes, it doesn't work. It can't upload the files. Yeah. So let's have a look. Let's see if I can show you that. Maybe go first to my client. So this is my client. Close this one. As I mentioned, on the client side, there is a specific log which is called diagnostics. Let me open that one first. And if I then go to the server and I take this device, so I go to devices, I'm demoing on client 01. So right click, client diagnostics, and here you can see the collect client log files option. So it immediately tells me, okay, the client that you want the log files from, it's online, so it will be notified as soon as possible. And that's it. So if all goes well, and this might take a little bit time, we should see something coming up here in the diagnostics log. There we go. So what it does in the background is that it's running a script to collect those files. Yeah? And you can see the file collection, it's already done, and it's been sent up to the site. Yeah. Now on the site server itself, where am I here? In the inboxes, software inventory, as I mentioned, it's piggybacking on that channel. In the file call folder, this is where the collected files eventually show up. Now, this might take a while, but they will show up here. And then later on, once they are there, if I start the Resource Explorer for this specific device, and I can show you from the files from my test, you have here the in the 3 diagnostic files. Yeah, and here you can see I've done this demo 3 times. So 733. Yeah, these are the latest files which I just collected. If I then right click, I can open them up in Support Center, and I can start analyzing all the different log files and see what the issue with the client is. So I've never really had to visit the client to grab those log files and get them for further analysis. Yeah. So of course, logical question. If we do this many times on a lot of clients, what about storage? Well, there is a maintenance task which is called delete aged collected files. By default, it's set to 90 days. So anything that you've retrieved from the clients older than 90 days will be removed from the site server. Yeah, so that's something to take into account. All right, let's go back to the slides. Edge management. Of course, Microsoft has released a new Microsoft Edge Chromium-based browser, and logically, the tool to manage that also needs to evolve. So what they have now is the Edge management dashboard. It's in the software library that you can find it, and it gives you insights in browser usage. So not only for Edge, but also for other browsers being used in your environment. Now, keep in mind that to populate the dashboard, you need specific data, and that data comes from hardware inventory. So keep in mind that the classes that are shown here on the slide need to be enabled for the dashboard to be populated properly. And this is what it looks like. So this is a screenshot taken from Microsoft, as I don't have many browsers in my lab environment. Here you can see in this specific environment, 50% of the devices have Edge installed. You can also see in the second tile which other browsers are used. The third tile gives you a pretty good indication of, okay, how do end users, if they are able to set the default browser, what's their behavior? What's their preferred browser? And then at the bottom tiles, you can see the different versions, because Edge, of course, is evolving fast, and there are many updates and new versions coming out. So if you want to baseline, this gives you a pretty good idea on what versions that you need to upgrade. And then you also have a preferred browser by device. So based on usage of the past week, or the past 7 days, you can see which browsers are most commonly used in your environment. Yeah. For managing updates, well, as Edge is evolving, if there is now in 2002 an option, I call it the fire and forget option. If you create the Microsoft Edge application through the wizard in Configuration Manager, you now have an option to always automatically update the browser. So if you don't want to have a baseline or you don't do strict version management for the Edge browser, you can, as you see in the screenshot, just enable this checkbox, allow Microsoft Edge to automatically update, and then it will update the devices as new releases are being released by Microsoft. Okay, moving on to the next one. Task sequences as an application deployment type. Now, as I mentioned, current branch is for production usage, but there are a few features, I think there are 4 in total in this 2002 release, which are flagged as pre-release features. Those are features that you explicitly have to enable through the administration workspace before you can start using them. This one is a pre-release feature. What Microsoft states is that pre-release is not really 100% production ready yet, but they want to give you the opportunity to start using it in your production environment should you want to. Yeah. Now, what can we do with this specific feature? Well, this helps us in tackling the installation of complex applications. Let's say that you have an application installation that needs to stop a service first, needs to remove a file somewhere else before doing the uninstall of the old version, then start the service again and doing the install of a new version. Those are scenarios that we typically could not cope with using the application model. Now we can, because what they've done is they've done integration with task sequences. And if you define a deployment type for an application, you now have the option to use a deployment type which is called task sequence. And that you can see in the screenshot here. If you select the deployment type of the task sequence type, then you just have to specify which task sequence that you would want to run. Of course, you have to have that task sequence pre-created, and that's a logical step. Yeah, we can use it for installation purposes and uninstallation purposes. So that's pretty neat. One caveat, you can only deploy to device collections. So that's an important one to take into account. And secondly, what Microsoft recommends is not to use install application steps in those task sequences. You would have to revert or rely on install package steps. So those are 2 caveats at this point in time, which you have to take into account. Yeah. All right. What else do we have? Bootstrapping task sequences after client registration. Why would we want to do that? Well, there are specific scenarios where you want a new client, as soon as it's installed, that you wanted to have it run specific task sequences. Think about a scenario where you want to do additional configuration steps, install specific apps, for example, or run scripts. You want those actions to occur as soon as possible. Yeah. So what Microsoft has done, they've built a capability or a hook where you can start a task sequence on a client as soon as it's completing the registration process. So when you install a new client at the very early stages, it tries to register itself with the site. If it succeeds, then it should trigger a task sequence. So how can you do that? By simply adding an installation property to the client installation, and it's called provision TS. So provision TS, and then you specify the deployment, so not the task sequence ID, but the deployment ID for the task sequence deployment. Yeah. If you do that, then it will trigger it as soon as a client registers. A very specific scenario, and I've added this on this slide, is, for example, in co-management. If you do co-management and you do Windows 10 device provisioning with Autopilot, so it's coming in from the cloud side, from the Intune side, the device gets enrolled into Intune, but then you want to do co-management and also install the config manager client. Well, that would be a scenario where you may want to do further configuration on that client as soon as it registers. Yeah, that's a typical example that they give. All right, what else do we have? OSD improvements. Well, the check readiness task sequence step, commonly used in upgrade scenarios for Windows 10, but also usable in other scenarios should you want to. It used to be limited. It used to be limited to the 4 first options that you see in the screenshot. So the memory, the CPU, disk space, and OS, client or server. Now they've added a couple of new prerequisite checks to that list. So yeah, anything related to the architecture of the operating system, versioning, version of the config manager client, language settings is an interesting one. Whether the machine is on the connected to the power supply, whether it's on the wired network or on the wireless network. Important things to check when you're doing a Windows 10 upgrade. We used to rely on specific task sequence steps and scripting to give us answers to those checks and those questions. Now we can do it natively in the task sequence. Yeah. One important thing to mention is that it runs through all these checks. So even if the second check fails, it will check everything else up until the end. And then it will evaluate. If one or more have failed, the task sequence step fails as a whole as well. Yeah, that's an important thing to know. Furthermore, for OSD and task sequences, they have given some more granularity to the progress. It's also very interesting in long-running task sequence scenarios, upgrades, for example. Using a variable, you can give different types of progress indications in the installation progress window. So if you set the TS progress info level variable to level 1, yeah, it will include the step we're at, the total steps, and that's it. So it will say, okay, we're at step 5 out of 10, for example. If we set that variable to level 2, then we get the current step, the total step, and also the percentage of the whole task sequence. Yeah, and the third level is just giving you the percentage, so not the steps. What they've also done is increase the window width, so more space to give an organization name in a single line. So where you see IT organization in that screenshot, if you have a very long organization name in there, specified through the client settings, then yeah, it wouldn't display properly on a single line. Now it can. Now about the counting, maybe one thing that I should add there, the total number, what it doesn't include, for example, are groups. It will add to the count the steps in a specific group, but the group itself is not counted as a specific step. Yeah. If you have run task sequence steps, the step itself is not added as well. Anything running in that subtask sequence, of course, is added to it. Yeah. And if you have any steps disabled, they will not be counted either. So the number is pretty accurate. Anything that's being run effectively is added to the counter. Okay, to wrap up, I think on OSD, this is my last topic on operating system deployment. A couple of new variables, so detecting the UEFI, secure boot state on a UEFI device. So if you look at that variable and see what the value is, yeah, enabled, disabled, or not available, that means that the device simply doesn't support the secure boot feature. Yeah. A couple of variables to configure the user context. So if you have run command line or run PowerShell script steps, you can now specify through variables in which context they should run. And if you have PowerShell scripts, there's also now a way to load parameters for your script into a task sequence variable. So this is yeah, a couple of nice small add-ons to enhance your task sequences. Okay, that's enough about OSD. Let's talk about orchestration groups. Orchestration groups, aka server groups, or I shouldn't call it like that. It's as Microsoft says, it's an evolution of a feature called server groups. Server groups, yeah, started its life a long time ago, and it didn't really come to a mature state. So I think they revamped everything, and they called this one, yeah, the next evolution of server groups, and they named it orchestration groups. Keep in mind, this is also a pre-release feature. So potentially not fully ready for production use yet. If you had already in the past enabled the server groups feature and started creating server groups, if you upgraded to 2002, your server groups will be automatically migrated to orchestration groups. It's a specific node in the console, so your server groups are migrated to there. Yeah. What's the purpose of an orchestration group? Well, it gives you control over specific groups of servers when, for example, doing software updates. You can say, I have 4 servers in an orchestration group. If 50% of them are patched, then you can start with the next 2 servers. Yeah. You can say, okay, I want these servers to be patched in a specific order. Server 2 first, then server 1, then server 4, then server 3, for example. You can also say, okay, I need to run specific steps prior to running the update and post-update as well. You can here define scripts, PowerShell scripts, with actions to be run. Yeah? So that's the purpose of orchestration groups. So what you have to do is put a device in an orchestration group, and of course it can only be a member of one orchestration group. A single device cannot be in multiple orchestration groups. There is a theoretical limit of 1,000 devices per orchestration group. Yeah. Every machine that you add, or every client that you add to an orchestration group, must be running the latest version of the Config Manager client, so 2002 or even later in the future. Yeah. So, and if somebody does the installation of software updates through the software center, well, whatever is defined in the orchestration group is not respected. So it really has to be like a normal monthly updating scenario where you target a set of devices in a large group. Yeah, those 4 servers, as per my example, are in that group. As soon as they are targeted with the same deployment for the same updates, they will adhere to the settings in the orchestration group. That's the idea of how it should work in production. Yeah. A small under the hood update with a significant impact, in my opinion, servicing stack updates. This is something that used to be released not that often by Microsoft. And in the past year, I've seen a servicing stack update, I think, almost every month. The problem is with servicing stack updates that they are a prerequisite for specific other updates or cumulative updates to be installed. Yeah. So it could be in the past, prior to this release, that you had multiple reboots because the servicing stack update wasn't installed first, and then it was rerunning a scan and you had the same or more updates showing up. So it was very difficult to control. So what they've done now is that if you have a list of updates being applicable to a client and there is a servicing stack update in there, it will be installed first. So installing the SSU first, then triggering a software update evaluation cycle will ensure that everything is installed in a most optimized way and we don't have to reboot as often. Yeah. Have to keep in mind that this works in, again, a fully automated scenario. If that list of updates is published in the software center and an administrator or an end user starts selectively installing updates, then the order is not respected. It doesn't install the SSUs first. So that's an important one to take into account. Yeah, this is, I think, not really relevant for a lot of people, but for Office 365 updates, we can now also service them in non-internet connected environments, and that wasn't possible prior to this version. And now they have included a tool, the Offline Update Exporter tool, which allows you to do that and import your updates for Office 365 in a disconnected environment. BitLocker management, I'll leave this in for reference. Yeah, additional settings that we can configure. So this is the evolution of the MBAM being integrated with Configuration Manager. Also here, they have simplified certificate management. So the HTTPS requirement used to be for the entire management point. That's gone now. It only is a requirement for the IIS website that hosts the recovery service. So that's a simplification there as well. What else do we have? Yeah, reporting. I think this is something that was missing a bit of love in the past, let's say, years. What they've done now is Power BI report server integration. And of course, this will give us better performance and also more visualization capabilities, modern visualization as it's here on the slide, to report to our management. So this is, in my opinion, pretty cool. To get there, what we will have to do if you're already running a reporting services point, you will have to uninstall it. Uninstall the reporting services point, install the Power BI report server, and reinstall the reporting services point on top of that. Yeah. At that point, you still have both. It's not that when you have Power BI that you don't have the SSRS reports anymore. When you're at that stage, you can still have both in there. Of course, what do we need? A license. So I'm not a licensing expert, but I found this information online. So we need a Power BI Premium license or a SQL Server Enterprise Edition license to run this. And then from a tooling perspective, we need the Power BI Report Server 2019 and the Power BI Desktop, but specifically the version that states that it's optimized for Power BI Report Server. So that's what we need to be able to author and publish our own Power BI reports. Yeah, it integrates nicely with the Config Manager console. Of course, it's also accessible through the web interface. And also Microsoft, not that long ago, I think a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, they have published a couple of sample reports for this feature as well. But I've noticed that 3 days ago, they pulled them. Apparently, it's also in the documentation. There was an issue with that, and they pulled the download. So the documentation is still there, but you just can't download the files at this point. I'm assuming that as soon as this gets resolved, the download will be available again, and you can grab the sample reports. Okay, a couple of smaller things as we move towards the end of the session. Boundary groups for devices. So yeah, just something in the console. What you can do now in the devices node, you can add a column which gives you the boundary group for a specific set of clients. Sending improvements. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with that, or a lot of people use that. It's something that Microsoft really pays attention to. So if you noticed in the top right corner of a Config Manager console, you can send feedback, send a smile, send a frown, or ask for guidance. And they've added a couple of improvements there as well. When you create the feedback, when you provide the feedback, then a status message is now being created, and it will give you a history of, okay, what feedback or when was feedback submitted, who was logged on to the console when the feedback was submitted. It will also give you a feedback ID, which you get, as you can see here in the screenshot, which you get as soon as you submit feedback. And it will also tell you if it failed, if it was a success or a failure when you've tried to send feedback. I think if there's some time at the end of the session, I can quickly show you that in my lab as well. But as I mentioned, use this because Microsoft is really paying attention to that feedback and acts upon it rather quickly. Yeah. A little bit out of band of the 2002 release, but it was also released this month, and that's the Community Hub. You may have already noticed the Community workspace in the Configuration Manager console. And up until now, what you saw there was a reference to the Configuration Manager documentation. Yeah. Now with the Community Hub, there's a second node there that you will see in that specific workspace. And yeah, this is a feature which I think is really, really neat. It's an optional feature, so you have to enable it from the features node in the administration workspace. And it bottom line gives you a location where you can find quite some cool content, which is pre-created for you. So you do not have to reinvent the wheel. What can you get there? Well, PowerShell scripts, for example, reports, task sequence templates, applications, and CIs. Right now, the content is rather limited, and it's only Microsoft that can provide content there. But in the future, they envision, of course, to open it to the community. For example, MVPs will be able to add content there, and I'm assuming other people as well. So that's a pretty neat location where you can get some out of the box or pre-created a nice content for your Configuration Manager environment. One thing to mention there is that there are 2 prerequisites to be able to open up the Community Hub through the Config Manager console. And you need a device running a Windows 10, a specific Windows 10 build. 17110 is the one that we need. And it has to have .NET Framework 4.6 installed. So in my lab, for example, I'm running my console most commonly on the site server. Not the best practice in production, but in lab, it's fine. I cannot open up the Community Hub there. So I need to install the console on a specific client, which meets the prerequisites, and then I can open it up. Maybe I can demo that if there's a few minutes left as well. Yeah. Well, maybe just dig into that in these 2 last topics in the lab. So what we talked about, what we talked about is the feedback. So this is the small smiley that you're looking for. Send a smile, and then you get this wizard. Yeah, you can type something here. You can include your email address, So Microsoft can send you or contact you if they have any further questions. You can automatically include a screenshot of where you are in the console. This is what you do here. Yeah. Or choose a specific screenshot if you have already taken a few. And then you can submit your feedback. Now, I'm not going to do that. Just before this session, I did a small test and my feedback was submitted successfully. So if I now go to my monitoring workspace, to my status message queries, and just open up the ones from the past, I think an hour will be okay. 1 hour ago. And if I then, as I mentioned, we have specific IDs for sending feedback. If I look for 53900, oh, was it more than an hour ago? Hang on. Let me try again. Oh, sorry about that. Let's do it like this. Yeah, so what I did earlier was send some feedback. And if I open up the details, you can see that this user from this device, so the console was running on this server, I've sent feedback, and this is the feedback ID. Yeah, so pretty cool that we can trace this. If you have multiple admins working in your environment, it gives you at least an idea of what feedback was sent to whom. Yeah. Now, as a last step, maybe, well, I'm not sure if I can open it up. I mentioned the Community Hub. So this is what you get if your prerequisites are not met. So my console locally on my site server, I'm unable to load it. So I have to load it from a client. Now, I'm not sure if I can open up this one. Is it client one? No, I need to open a second client where my console is installed. Let's see if this works, if the demo gods are still with me. This client has been giving me issues all day, so I'm not sure if it will work. Let's see. If I can log on, that would be great. Yeah, it's taking too long. I had issues logging on with this client, so unfortunately I won't be able to show you this, I'm afraid. I encourage you, if you have 2002 already in your environment, give it a shot, the Community Hub, and have a look at what's available there. I've also done a more detailed blog post about this, where I've installed a piece of content from the Community Hub in an environment and written the details. Oh, maybe just last minute, I am able to show you. Hang on. Not the most performing machine in my environment. So this is a Windows 10 device that does meet the requirements for opening up the Community Hub. So let's see if this works. There we go. Well, let's keep it running for a while. I had one more slide that I wanted to show you. And this is about OneTrace. So that's my last slide for this session. This is about OneTrace utility. So the OneTrace utility, a lot of people are not aware of it, but it's a pretty cool tool. It's let's say CMTrace on steroids, and they are adding capabilities to those tools as well. And one of the things it can do is it can group log files for specific scenarios. So what you see here in the screenshot is that if I'm on a client, I connect to a client with OneTrace, and I'm doing troubleshooting specifically to, for example, installing applications. If I click here in the drop-down application management, it will give me all the log files related specifically to that feature in configuration manager. So I don't have to figure out myself like I do with CMTrace. Okay, what do I need? Do I need up enforce? Do I need up discovery? What else is available? Okay, up intent eval is important. So things like that are grouped for you automatically, and it will give you the log files that you need straight away. Yeah. And that's it for the session. I think there is, I'm just spot on, it's 5 o'clock. Maybe there is time for Q&A. While I just go back one more time. Yeah, I can't connect to the site, so sorry, but the demo for the hub will not work. My apologies for that. Any specific questions in the chat or?
Not at the moment, but let's give them a couple of minutes if there are any questions. Thank you for a great overview of new features, and I think it's another proof of the config manager team that config manager is still alive and kicking, and even more than it was ever. A lot of new great features. I don't know if there are any questions left. Let me quickly check Twitter. Nope. So let's wrap this up. Thank you for being with us today, Tim.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for taking your time out of your daily schedule, busy schedule. So, and thank you for our attendees for joining us today. Again, would like to also thank our sponsors and remind you that Derek will be here or virtually here next week, same time, same place. And please leave your feedback about this session and the other sessions. So, thank you. And I forgot to share, so here's the feedback URL. And thank you for your time, and see you next week.